Hello, everyone, and welcome to Politics is Sexy. I'm joined by Huffington Post columnist Rich Rubino and also political author. We're missing our friends Tom Farmer and Ed Rombach tonight, but we will have some time to discuss one of your favorite topics, Rich Rubino, elections and the midterm elections coming up. Only a few months away, but already a lot of buzz. And I think a lot of people are asking, is this going to be a referendum on Obama or Obamacare? Rich, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think you see this is a galvanizing and unifying issue for Republicans in terms of being in opposition to Obamacare. It's very unpopular. We saw recently in the election in the 13th Congressional District of Florida. That was the flagship issue that put the Republicans over the top in a swing district. I think just like in 1994, it was Bill Clinton's Budget Reconciliation Act, which raised taxes on the wealthy, which became the major issue. As a result, the Republicans picked up 53 seats, took over the House for the first time in 40 years. You saw in 2006, every even the most conservative Democrats were running essentially against George W. Bush on the issue of Iraq. The result being that they picked up 31 seats in the House, and they picked up the House that year. I think this year Obamacare is essentially the issue. It's very unpopular, and very few Democrats who are in at least marginal or swing districts are defending it.
And we've already seen a little bit of evidence in this in a Florida congressional election between David Jolley and Alex Sink, where this top-tier Democrat, a Democratic-picked candidate, lost to David Jolley, a Republican, and he did heavy-duty talking of and relating her, connecting her to Obamacare. So we're bound to see a little bit more of that. So, the Republicans have that on their side. They also have on their side, Rich, a recent Wall Street Journal and NBC polls showing the president's approval rating at 41%. What do Democrats have on their side, in their arsenal, to win some elections?
Well, politics, I think, is always about putting yourself in the mainstream and your opponent on the extreme. Now, by that, I mean the mainstream of your constituency. Now, obviously, the mainstream in, say, Nancy Pelosi's district is going to be a lot further left than, say, the mainstream in Provo, Utah, for example. So there's a balance there. But essentially, what I think Democrats, the moderate Democrats who are up for re-election, what they're going to try to do is going to put themselves as center or even center right, and basically try to put their opponents to the right of even the Republicans in their congressional districts. For example, perfect example is the issue of Social Security privatization. Mark Pryor, who is a centrist Democrat, who's very vulnerable, arguably the most vulnerable Democrat this time around in Arkansas, a state that went 59% last time against Barack Obama for Mitt Romney. He's trying to link Tom Cotton, who represents the 4th Congressional District of Arkansas, essentially to recent statements he made that he supports allowing private insurance companies to compete with Social Security, for example. So you try to basically make your opponent on the extreme. The other thing you try to do, which I think Democrats that are in power, for example, Mary Landrieu is chairman of the Energy Committee and in the United States Senate, is you try to use your current position in terms of influence on non-ideological issues. For example, have you brought in jobs to your state or to your district? Is your influence are you on the agricultural committee? Are you putting things in the farm bill for example, sugar growers in your district?
So really bringing it back home, back to local.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I think you have to do. You try to take the position when your constituency is essentially inhospitable to your political party. You have to essentially make it, well, look, I'm effective. This is what I've done. Look at those jobs at the GE plant in my congressional district that I saved. Look at that military installation, for example, that I saved from. Look at the budget cuts that I've saved specifically for the community college in the district. Look at the earmarks I brought.
Right.
You're banning earmarks now, but those are basically the issues which I think they're not ideological, more or less in terms of effectiveness and competency and just constituent service.
Well, we do know that
they have the influence to them.
Even though they are on those committees, they're not going to get much done in this Congress. Rich, I wanted to ask you, looking at the Senate, a lot of people, including our friend Tom Farmer, is saying it's going to go to the Republicans. What are some of the key races that you're watching in the Senate that could flip sides for the Republicans?
Well, the great one, a perfect, I think a marquee matchup is in Arkansas. Mark Pryor is basically is running for a third term. The last time he ran for re-election, he had a very hospitable political environment in 2008. There wasn't even a major party opponent. He was the only Democrat who didn't have a major party opponent. This time around, he has a very formidable opponent in Tom Cotton, who is the congressman from the 4th Congressional District. He has a Harvard degree, military service background. He's basically he's running against essentially the National Democratic Party. The Arkansas Democratic Party is a lot more conservative than the National Democratic Party, and Mark Pryor is trying to make himself say that he's not a national Democrat. He's trying to run away from essentially from President Obama. I think running more toward Arkansas Democrats who are very popular in the state. Remember, there was a time when the entire Arkansas congressional delegation at all four House seats and the 2 United States Senate seats were Democrat. This is just a few years ago. They've since all gone Republican. He's kind of the last standing Democrat. And I think he will use the influence specifically of his father, David Pryor, Dale Bumpers, the former United States Senator, and Bill Clinton, all enormously popular in the state.
Right.
And they're going to try to distance himself as kind of an Arkansas Democrat versus a national Democrat. This is going to be a very interesting race to watch. Can he survive as kind of one of the remaining Southern Democrats?
And what
another one that I think another one that will be very interesting to watch is going to be in Louisiana. Mary Landrieu, who recently became the chairman of the Energy Committee, which is a position that she can really use to her political benefit in terms of talking about her influence and what she can do for the state.
Right.
And it's interesting in Louisiana because they have what's called the jungle primary system, meaning in other words that they have almost a runoff. In other words, it's not a Republican against a Democrat. Every candidate right now, there's Mary Landrieu, then there's 3 Republicans running. The major one, who almost everyone thinks is going to go on to the runoff, is Bill Cassidy, the congressman from Louisiana. There's also two other Republicans and a Libertarian running. And essentially what happens is no one gets 50% of the vote, which is almost invariably going to happen. They're going to go to a runoff. And that runoff is going to be December 6th. So it's going to be what's most likely going to happen, I think, is perhaps control of the United States Senate might hinge on that particular race.
On one race? On one race? So...
No, but there's one other. There's one other too.
Okay, real quick, and then let's move on to the House.
Yeah, there's one other too in Georgia, where Saxby Chambliss is retiring after 2 terms in the United States Senate. You have Michelle Nunn running as a Democrat. And you have 3 members of the Republican Party running as well, and they also have this same type of a system. So you may very possibly, I think, it may go to essentially the very end. It could be that everyone's waiting on that Georgia seat. Will that determine the balance of the Senate? If that's the case, then Bill Clinton's going to spend a month essentially in Georgia. Every Republican group's going to spend money there. Georgia will essentially become ground zero in the United States. This is where all the action will be.
Wow. Rich Rubino said it right here on Politics is Sexy. It's not going to be November 6th. It's going to be December 6th, the night to watch.
And then January 6th is the Georgia one. Georgia and Louisiana are 2 to watch. Not in November, but December.
All right. And still on the Senate, let's just stay one more second. Your prediction? Tom Farmer says it's going to go to the Senate, to the Republicans. Senate's going to twist around to the Republicans. What are your predictions?
Yeah, I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. It's going to come down to that Georgia seat. The Republicans will pick up the Georgia seat, and then it'll be a 1-seat victory. But, of course, it could go either way. Whatever way it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of gridlock because it's going to be a very, very close United States Senate. Remember, if it is 50-50, by the way, the Democrats have Joe Biden, and he breaks the tie. So.
Right. Okay. In the House, what are you watching?
Most fascinating race, I think, is John Barrow in Georgia. He is, I think, the last remaining conservative Southern Democrat. Now, I think there are 3 that's running for election. Jim Matheson in Utah and Mike McClintock in North Carolina are the other 2, I think, conservative Democrats. They're retiring because they realize that their district is so hard for them to maintain, particularly Matheson, who went 67% last time for Romney. But in John Barrow's case, he's representing a Southern district in Georgia. He's the last remaining Caucasian Southern Democrat, and he's essentially he's a pro-gun. He's has the most conservative voting record of any Democrat in the United States Congress. He virulently opposes Obamacare. We'll see if he can still survive, even in this inhospitable climate to Democrats specifically. I think it's going to be very fascinating to see whether he will survive. He's always been kind of lone survivor, and it's very interesting to see if he can survive if he can survive in these circumstances, he can survive just about any circumstances. Now, the most vulnerable Republican, I think, is actually Mike Kaufman. Interesting scenario: Colorado's 6th congressional district. Kaufman took over. This is the district member, Tom Tancredo, a very conservative member of the United States Congress, who was a part of the immigration caucus, who opposed not only immigration reform, but actually supports a moratorium on legal immigration. Yeah. Kaufman came in essentially running as a very conservative Republican, and he's been a very conservative Republican, specifically on immigration issues. He was a member of the same caucus Tancredo was a member of. He kind of won on Tancredo's coattails, but his district has since been by the the Democratic governor have signed a redistricting package, and basically it makes his district a lot more Democratic. It's now a swing district, so now he has to appeal to a lot of Democrats. He has to appeal to a lot of Hispanic voters, and how he's trying to cultivate that, not only learning Spanish, but also he's come out for the DREAM Act, which essentially grants citizenship to children. Parents have come over here illegally. So he's trying to move a little bit to the left to try to cultivate that constituency, but he's really never had to run in a really conservative part of the country. This is somebody who once questioned whether Barack Obama is really an American, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting to see whether he will be able to moderate himself to get reelected, and of course will almost invariably be a Republican-friendly year.
Rich, you mentioned one person retiring, but there has been a number of people retiring, a number of longtime members of Congress just saying, enough, what's going on?
Congress is no fun anymore. If you think about it, let's say you have a district in California, so you're taking the 4.5-hour, 5-hour flight to Washington on a Tuesday morning or a Monday night. You're there for 3 days, essentially, of long committee meetings. You're there for votes. You're there essentially watching your colleagues grandstand on the House floor when you already know how they're going to vote on everything. Then you're going back to your congressional district, and then every time you're in your district, you are essentially working because you're at all sorts of events, everything from the Boy Scout troops to the Little League, everything else, and people everywhere are coming up to you and saying, why did you vote this way, and asking you questions. It's really, you're in the limelight constantly, and frankly, a lot of them can be making a lot more money doing something in the private sector. A lot of them, by the way, might not necessarily go back to their congressional district, like stay in Washington, D.C. with that revolving door maybe, and become a lobbyist and really be able to take care of their grandchildren.
And ultimately,
it is a hard life going back and forth like that, and there's very little reward because there's very little major legislation that's passing
and that's exactly what I was just going to say. It must be infuriating not getting any legislation passed in this Congress. So why not retire and less stress? Rich Rubino, with the Huffington Post and also an author, you've been posting some great stuff on our Facebook page. If you're watching this, check out Politics is Sexy on Facebook. We have This Day in History and little known facts and fun ideas, fun things in history that Rich Rubino has written about in his book.
Politics can be fun, yeah.
Politics is fun, and it's very sexy. And looking forward to another edition of Politics is Sexy next week, where we'll discuss this and much more. Rich Rubino, your final thoughts about the uniqueness, perhaps, of this 2014 election, midterm election? Anything that strike out for you as being unusual or something noteworthy?
Nope, I don't think it's really unique. In 1958, there was a mild recession. It became a referendum on the Eisenhower administration. Democrats took seats. In 1966, there was a referendum on the Great Society, a referendum on the protracted Vietnam War. Republicans won seats. 1974 was a referendum on Watergate.
All right.
As a result, the Watergate class came in. Every year there's every 6 year of a presidency, there's some sort of a referendum on the incumbent president, by the way. For George W. Bush, it was Iraq. But you go back between 1998, when Bill Clinton's Democrats picked up seats in the United States House of Representatives, they only picked up 5. That was the first time since 1822, when James Monroe's Democratic-Republican Party picked up seats, that a party in power who owns the presidency actually picked up seats. So what does that tell us? This is not a unique election. It's essentially an election where Republicans will pick up seats. That's what's supposed to happen. The question is really how many, and will they have enough to pick up the Senate? But in terms of the House, it's just a matter of trying to hold as many seats as possible. There is almost there is the minimum chance that they even come close in the House to picking up seats. It's a matter of essentially how much they're going to lose.
All right, you heard it right here from Rich Rubino on Politics is Sexy. Thanks so much, Rich, and see you next time on another edition of Politics is Sexy. Good night.